The life cycle of a small-time real estate investor is very up and down. It is full of peaks and valleys, with your first peak being the actual purchase of the property or the acquisition of the property, whether that is arbitrage or you've inherited it or you've bought specifically with the idea of doing a rental in mind, or you have bought a property in the past that you lived in and you're ready to move on to your next property and you're going to keep your existing property and use it as a rental. So those are kind of the ways that people acquire a property, and that is going to be the first peak of your trajectory. And honestly, the biggest hurdle of the entire thing is acquiring the property. That is going to be the scariest part. But after you acquire that property, the next thing that we see sometimes is a downhill a little bit, because maybe that property has things that's required before it can go on the market. But more importantly, you have to get tenants at that point, and that's scary. You've never done it before. You don't know what that looks like. And for those of you that watch these videos and you're a midterm renter, or you're a midterm renter host, or you're thinking about going after midterm rental tenants, it's also like, well, what does property management look like for that? How do I find tenants, etc.? And so this video is going to focus on that down period of the two ways that you can acquire tenants. One being that you hire a property manager, and we'll talk about the pros and cons with that. The second being that you are going to self-property manage, and we'll talk about the pros and cons with that. We'll also talk about just some high-level tips, 3 high-level tips for property management, for self-property management to be successful. Because I am a huge advocate of, if you plan for your property to be a midterm rental or a long-term unfurnished rental, you should not pay for property management. Now, like I said before, I will cover what you should think about with a midterm rental property manager, but I think it is in your best interest to self-property manage it. You can save yourself a lot of money, you can learn a new skill, and it's truly not that hard. And I will talk you through it. The way I think about this is the same way I thought about quitting my job in 2017. So at a full-time job, I was at a marketing company that was growing, and I wasn't sure if I should quit. I'd never been a real estate agent. I was like, should I do this? And at the end of the day, I thought, you know what, quit this job and find another job that you're very unsatisfied with. And so I made the leap, and I never looked back. I think with self-property management, you can always try to self-property manage. And if you decide after a month or two that it's really not working for you, you can then go hire a property manager. And that shouldn't be a devastating cost. It should be, a couple of months rent you should be able to carry while you make that decision, while you test it out. If it works, it's going to save you a ton of money, not only in the short term, but also in the long term of not paying other people to manage your property. If you have acquired a property, congratulations, because it is such a big deal. And it is, from all of my experience working both as a consultant for investors, but also as a real estate agent that has invested myself and works with a lot of investors, and I have since 2017, acquiring the property is the hardest part. There's so much money on the line. There's so many decisions to be made. And if you are in this part of your journey right now, so you're kind of in the neutral area where you haven't acquired a property yet, but you're thinking about it, you should be as aggressive as possible in the beginning of your journey. The reason for that is because every month that goes into summer, you are losing buying power. In addition to that, as you put in offer after offer and it gets rejected, it puts more and more stress on you and your spouse. You start to have more and more arguments. Starting to invest seems like a less and less appealing thing. And so if you're aggressive in the beginning, you're going to knock out putting in 10 offers and a lot of rejection before you finally get to where you want to be. And you also have more buying power now than you probably will have in the future. So if you are watching this and you're thinking about buying right now is a really good time to buy, because it's the spring, it's not full-time summer. Real estate agents should thank me if you've been kind of thinking about it but not moving. Now is very much the time. Okay, so we have acquired the property. Now we need to acquire the tenants. And it's okay if you haven't acquired tenants yet, but what we want to avoid is a property sitting vacant for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year, because we have some kind of reservation around having tenants. And that reservation could be that you're a perfectionist. So you're not going to put a property up on a website until you know it's done perfectly, but you don't have the time to figure out that platform or what the rules are around it. Or you have reservations about the tenants, a lot of nerves around what kind of tenant I'm going to get. And because you don't want to have a problematic tenant, you just keep the property unrented. So you keep the property safe, but in the meantime, you don't make any money on the property. Or maybe the property just had some renovations that were needed and you're partially through them. But what we want to avoid is more than like, let's say 2 months of vacancy. Honestly, I was shocked. I was on a Facebook forum the other day and someone was saying, well, I have 4 months of vacancy, and someone else was saying that was normal. And I was like, that is absolutely not normal. I don't feel bad about it if you've had it, but also don't accept that as like 4 months is okay, because in midterms, it can be hard to stay occupied. That is just not the case. I have a 92% occupancy rate on my midterm rentals. I probably have a better occupancy rate than most long-term rentals, and I tend to get 40 to 65% above long-term unfurnished. And for a lot of the clients I work with, they also have those numbers. So I do not think this is a regional thing, and I think that most properties will rent. It is a matter of pricing and marketing. It's very rarely a real problem with the property that it doesn't rent. So if you have that issue, you want to get out before your vacancies stack up, because it gets easier and easier to think, well, it's not going to rent, or whatever fear or paranoia has created the initial problem with getting it rented, that magnifies as time marches forward. Property managers, if you're not going to do it yourself. So property managers in the long-term space usually take 8 to 12% of your rent per month, and they also will charge you half of the rent or more for the first month. And this is why it's been kind of hard to secure a midterm property manager, is because if the rents are 3 months or 4 months, then you can't be paying the property manager half of every first month and then 8 to 12% after that, because it would get very expensive and your numbers just wouldn't make sense. But they also have to have a model where it makes sense for them to set it up, because it's the setup that's a decent amount of work. So that's my theory why we're not seeing a ton of really strong midterm rental property managers emerge. That said, if you want to hire a property manager, the kind of questions you want to ask a midterm rental property manager: what is the situation if I only have a 4-month rental? What does the charge look like? Because I understand that typically the way property managers make their money is this, and it doesn't necessarily work with your model. So how do you work around that? What do you consider to be an acceptable vacancy rate? Because I would say when I'm working with consulting clients, I'll tell them 80% just to be conservative, but I think that's very conservative. I up their Google reviews and see what kind of complaints they're getting. Major complaints I'm hearing about property managers are that they put in, tenants that the host owners are not necessarily happy about because they just need to put someone in. They let it sit vacant. They underprice it because their interests are different than yours. Their interests are to get you off their back, right? Like, you are the person that's going to be hounding them if it stays unrented. So their interests are just to get someone in to get you to go away for the most part. And your interests are to get someone that is not a huge issue in the property and paying. So you have slightly different interests. And the other want to be in a position where you're managing the property manager. And a really good way to find out if that's going to be a problem is for you to reach out to them and see how quickly do they respond to your email? How quickly do they respond to your voicemail? Do they communicate with you in a friendly, professional manner? If they don't, that is definitely not the property manager you want to use, and you want to move on until you find someone that does respond in a good time frame, can explain to you why the midterm rental strategy is a little bit different than the short term or the long term. So that is property management and hiring out for midterm rental property management. Get into self property management if you feel like you've learned learned something up to this point in the video, please like the video. If you want more content on self-property management or midterm rental property management, subscribe and you'll get notified when I have new videos out. Now let's talk about if you're self-property managing. So if you are self-property managing, there's 3 steps that you can take that will really help you. The first is to go on the big platforms and do not focus on the little niche platforms. What you want is more eyes on your rental, and I would say Airbnb is an absolute must, and then a secondary platform would not need corporate housing by owner. You do not need a niche nurse site, an insurance site. I'm not going to talk about that. If you want information on that, I'll link to a video at the end about why that's a bad midterm rental strategy, but it is, trust me. You just need to be on 2 big sites and make one of them Airbnb. So that is suggestion number 1, and that will give you a lot of range and get a lot of eyes on your property. The second thing is, if you are going to rent out on Airbnb, which you should, then you need to price on the month level, because some months are going to be worth more to you than other months. And I have seen people lose between $3,000 to $5,000 a month because they set the same rental price for every month. But as all short-term renters know, holidays, summers, they're worth a lot more than down season. And typically down season is November, December, January. You're going to get your lease during those months and get a lot more in the summertime. But it depends on where you're at. If you're in Mexico, December is the month that you're going to make the most. If you're in Savannah, the shoulder seasons are the months that you're going to make the most. So you just want to know when your high and low seasons are and then price accordingly. And you can do this in the calendaring with Airbnb. You cannot do it other places. You are just going to pick one monthly rental price and it's going to carry through all the months. So that is tip number 2. And then tip number 3 is to use your headline strategically. See on these rental platforms is really generic language, and examples of generic language are nearby, comfy, cozy, spacious, light-filled, cute, Victorian, Bob's Palace, like whatever. These are words that really don't tell people anything, especially when you name your place like the Little Blue Villa or Bob's Palace or whatever. That doesn't communicate anything. And when you say near, comfy, spacious, light-filled, these are descriptors that really your photos should demonstrate. So there's a lot more value in what the photos show than what you are telling them. And also those words are subjective. What I consider comfortable is very different than what the CEO of Apple considers comfortable, right? So it's a very subjective term and it doesn't really add value. So a much better way of using your headline is to be super specific in your headline. 5 blocks from downtown, washer and dryer in unit, dishwasher in unit, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That's a good one to put in for Airbnb, because when you put in a filter for, let's say you put in a filter for 2 bedrooms in Airbnb, it's going to show you everything that's 2 bedrooms or more. So a way to help focus the tenants is to put right in the headline, this is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and then go into the other amenities. But that will get attention on your property much faster than these generic words. If you are looking for a hybrid property management model, so you want someone to hold your hand through your property management, meaning you want someone to set up the platform for you, tell you why the platform should be set up this way, and vet your first tenant as well as secure your first tenant, and then hand it off to you. That's a service that I offer. I do it nationwide. Typically, I have found that I get people their first tenant between 3 to 5 weeks of our first conversation. I haven't had anyone that I haven't gotten a tenant for. Why I offer that is because I find that you get a lot more value much quicker when you have someone one-to-one setting it up and coaching you through your particular property versus taking a generic course that's kind of a one-size-fits-all.